The other chapter, and this might be my favorite chapter, is you end up going to Japan to work at a university, be kind of visiting professor. What I really loved about this one is you really laughed at yourself a lot during this because you're like, hey, I showed up to Japan at the wrong time. I showed up and everybody's like, why are you here now? And then your partner Scott comes over and you're like, oh, the leaves are going to be great. Oh, no, wait, this is the completely wrong time. And I really appreciate that. And again, was that something where you're like, hey, I'm going to have a little fun with myself. You got to put it all out there. Is it almost kind of a release valve because of heaviness to it that comes, and we'll talk about that. But is that kind of what pops out at you when you go to Japan? You're like, I'm completely out of my element here.
Well, Japan is both the most wild and the most civilized place at the same time. But there's also a kind of humor that maybe a sort of poking fun at oneself kind of humor that I experienced in a lot of the people that I met as well. In fact, I think that one of the people I met who's in this book is the great translator of Emily Dickinson, Masako Takeda. And she explained it was very hard to translate Dickinson because gender and first person and all those things are not part of the way the Japanese language works. So maybe there is a kind of humility that's just, there in the language and in the culture. But I think, I talked about how I was like that, oh no, the Pulitzer, I'm going to have to stop working. I mean, I was kind of working up to the very last minute before I got there to Japan on my Elizabeth Bishop biography, which had just come out. And I really had no opportunity to prepare for being in Japan. And I was there as a visiting professor in American literature, so I didn't really need to know Japan, but the whole situation was actually pretty comical. And as you mentioned, I thought, well, I'll go for the fall semester. That must be September through November. The very polite professor who said, okay, that's fine, didn't inform me. And why would he have that the calendar, the academic calendar is entirely different in Japan. You teach from, October through maybe middle of February, and then there's a big break for cherry blossom season. And then they're teaching school through the summer and it's really hot there. So when I arrived on, September 1st, I had to go like from 1 to 30, it's like very dramatic. I had to be right on the first of the month of whatever month it was. And I got there and I found out that, the university wasn't open, wouldn't be open for another month. And the professors who were going to help me out weren't even anywhere near there. So I had this whole month of kind of trying to figure out how to be in Japan. But it was a very important time for me. I had never lived outside of the country before. I had always wanted to do that, but I didn't have a junior year abroad. I couldn't afford that. And I applied for fellowships, but didn't get them, and I'm not sure I would have chosen Japan. I probably would have wanted to go to France because I'd studied French in high school, but it couldn't have been a better place and it couldn't have been more different. And I think this combination of the wild and the civilized was so powerful to me. Actually, the one place it reminded me of most was Pasadena while I was there. It was very much an outside kind of experience. The campus had all these, what we would call pergolas when we were, we had lunch in the pergola. And when I was in junior high, outside, I never once ate in a cafeteria indoors from first grade to senior year. That was just, who would do that?
New Yorkers, that's who would do it.
It felt kind of like home, and a lot of the vegetation and the smells, it was very much like Southern California in that sense. And of course, the Southern Californians, the architecture was quite influenced by Japan, the arts and crafts houses of the Green and Green brothers, which I think have mostly survived that fire. While I was there, I was, there to be an American literature professor. And I had, just before going there, it was Thoreau's 200th birthday in July 2017. And I'd been at a big conference in Concord about that and met some Japanese scholars. And one of them talked about the Thoreau of Japan and showed some slides of a little replica of a hut, just the way there's a replica of Thoreau's cabin and the parking lot at Walden, if you've ever been there. Kind of early on, as I didn't know anybody there, but a friend of a friend had a friend, and we had coffee. This person was an American, but she'd lived in Japan all her adult life. I said, what do you know about this Kamo no Chomei, the Thoreau of Japan? She said, oh, well, he lived just right across the river here, and his hut was out not too far far outside of Kyoto, and his book, Hojoki, which is called The 10-Foot Square Hut. That's very well translated. You can read it. So I go right to the library. The library, at least, was open, and get a copy of it. And I'm just fascinated by this tale of a 12th century Buddhist hermit who, decides to leave the civilized life of the court, where he's a poet and might have been a, important functionary, but was kind of passed over, and instead goes out to what by the end of my time there, I was there for 3 months. First, I go see the replica of the hut, which is on the grounds of the shrine where his father had been a dignitary. I should say there's this amazing river that runs through Kyoto, the Kamo. It's unlike any, city with a river running through it. I live in Boston. There's the Charles River. You can walk along the banks and it's kind of pretty much the same level the whole time, or the Seine or the Thames. But here's this, there are people like in their waders fishing in this river. And if it rains, it rises. If the rain's let up, it's low again. They have little stones that you can walk across the river on these stones. I mean, who would let you do that around here? That would be incredible. Anyway, so I see the hut and I read his book and think about him. And I think also about my partner, Scott, who I had left behind. He needed to work, came to visit for a little while, but his health wasn't great. And that became an increasing concern while I was there. And that is part of what is in this essay, the sense of impermanence that the Buddhist thought or religion teaches one to embrace, really. And this is what Kamo no Chomei, after having lived through huge floods, huge fires, huge plagues, and retreats just to commune with the natural world and think his thoughts, and to learn how to live a solitary life with some equanimity, which became a lesson for me as I first faced the death of my partner in 2019. And then not long after that, the pandemic came and forced me, suddenly living alone for the first time, to be far more solitary than I had ever imagined I would need to learn how to be.